Laodicea Langston, known as Dicey to her family and friends, is remembered as one of South Carolina's young heroes of the American Revolutionary War. But there's a problem with telling her story. Dicey lived in the Carolina backcountry in a world where history wasn't always written down. Stories survived through families, neighbors, and generations of retelling. And over nearly 250 years, history and folklore have become difficult to separate. There are stories about Dicey that almost certainly grew in the telling. Others are possible, but impossible to prove. So we're going to do something a little different this episode. We're going to strip those stories away. We'll start with what we know about Dicey, place her in the world she actually lived in, and keep only those parts of her story that the historical record or the realities of that time and place give us good reason to believe. Because the real Dicey Langston doesn't need a legend. Her story is remarkable enough. The men around Dicey Langston made one mistake. They talked in front of her. It was the American Revolution, but in the South Carolina backcountry, the war didn't always look like two armies facing one another across a battlefield. Here, it could look more like a civil war. Neighbors chose different sides. Families did too. The man living down the road might support the king, his neighbor might support independence, and increasingly everyone wanted to know which was which. Dicey Langston knew which side she was on. She was a patriot. She was also about 15 years old, and that might have made her easy to underestimate. People talked. Dicey listened. Her father supported the Patriot cause, so did her brothers, but Loyalists lived all around them. Some of them were even relatives. Years later, Dicey's family remembered that she began carrying information she heard about Loyalist plans to Patriots in the area. Apparently, she did it often enough that people began to notice. Eventually, threats were made against her father. If his daughter continued helping the Patriots, he and his property could be held responsible. Her father told Dicey to stop. For a while, perhaps she did. Then she heard something she couldn't ignore. A group of Loyalists were preparing to attack a settlement where her brother and other Patriots were staying. Someone had to warn them. According to the story preserved by her family, Dicey slipped away during the night and went herself. She made her way through the Carolina backcountry until she reached the Elder settlement in Little Eden, South Carolina. She warned them of the pending attack, saving many lives. Before dawn, Dicey made the journey again, this time home. She changed out of her wet clothes and back to being the 15-year-old daughter her father thought was safely asleep at home. By breakfast, apparently no one knew she had even left, and they wouldn't know for some time. According to the story, those who knew what Dicey had done kept it to themselves until the war was over. There was good reason. This wasn't an adventure to be bragged about. If the Loyalists discovered who had carried the warning, Dicey hadn't simply risked punishment for herself. Her father had already been warned that the actions could bring consequences upon the entire family. Eventually, the war came directly to the Langston house. Armed Loyalists arrived looking for Dicey's brothers. They weren't there, but their father was. The confrontation became violent. One of the men stepped forward and raised a weapon towards the old man, and Dicey stepped between them. There was no army behind her, no weapon in her hands, just a teenage girl standing between an armed man and her father. By now, it would be easy to think we understand Dicey Langston. She was a brave young patriot, and she was. But another story preserved about her tells us something more interesting. One day, Patriot soldiers stopped at the Langston home. During their conversation, they mentioned that they intended to take horses belonging to a nearby Loyalist. Dicey's father knew the man. Whatever his politics, he had apparently given the Langstons little trouble. Taking his horses simply because he supported the other side didn't seem right. So Dicey's father sent someone to warn him. Dicey, the Loyalist was able to protect his property, That should have been the end of it. Dicey learned that the man now intended to gather other Loyalists and prepare an ambush for the Patriot soldiers when they arrived. So Dicey had another decision to make. She had just warned a Loyalist about the Patriots. Now she turned around and warned the Patriots about the Loyalists. The horses were saved, so were the men. Dicey seems to have understood something that many of the adults around her had forgotten. Being on the right side doesn't make everything you do right. And being on the other side doesn't mean everything done to you is deserved. Her allegiance was clear, but her sense of justice didn't stop at the edge of her politics. More than 2 centuries later, we may never know exactly where the history of Dicey Langston ends and the folklore begins. But perhaps the lesson preserved in those stories matters more than the legend. Justice isn't justice when it only benefits the people we agree with. It has to work both ways. That idea lies at the heart of American justice. Not one standard for our friends and another for our enemies, but the same standard for both. Dicey Langston was 15 years old. An ordinary person living through extraordinary circumstances who had the courage to act on that principle. And that lesson makes Dicey Langston a great American.